The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a Web API controller. Now, typically in a normal application, you're going to have a Web API and an MVC controller that does the same thing. But for our instances, our purposes here for our training, we're going to want to see the differences with using Ninject with Web API and with MVC. So let's go ahead and add a folder. We'll call it API. I like to put my controllers under a folder called API under the controllers folder. Other people like API controllers at the same root level as a website. Doesn't really matter, just as long as you separate them. I think it makes a nice, it makes it easier for someone else coming in to see how you've got things set up. So we're going to call this math controller. And we're going to inherit from API controller. And we're going to add a route prefix. That's going to be API/math. Now let's add 4 methods here. We'll start with the first one, add. Okay, and we're just going to add them together and return the result. We need to have a route on here. And we're going to say first as a URL parameter, and then second URL parameter, and then add. Okay, and a tool I like to use for testing web API is called Postman. So I have the URL already in here. It's our root URL /API/math/7. So that's going to map to our first parameter. 3 will map to second. And then our add method will be right here. Click send. And we get an error that it doesn't support get. Because this doesn't know, is it get, is it post, is it put, delete. We have a couple options here. We can do HTTP get, or we can rename it get add. We'll just rename it, it's pretty easy. And then that's just the convention. So if you want to be explicit, you can have the attribute. Click send again, we get 10. Now let's implement the other 3 methods for subtract, multiply, and divide. Subtract. And then multiply. And then divide. Reformat that, do a build. Double check the add still works. I don't know why it wouldn't. Subtract. That still is showing the addition, so we need to change the operator. Same with multiply and same with divide. So now let's rebuild that. Four, that's right. Multiply 21. We'll change this so it's nice and even. For divide. Okay, perfect. So it's all working. But we're not using our math service. I know you're disappointed. Let's add a constructor. Take iMath service, call it math service. And then Alt enter and we'll introduce create and initialize auto property. Sounds good. Get rid of public because it could be private. And then here we're going to do math service add first and then second. Math service subtract first and second. And then math service multiply first and second. The last one, divide second. Okay, so we have our ninject web common set up to map IMAP service to math service. We've got our dependency injection here. It should work, right? Well, there's still a couple things we have to do. Let's just test it. It says we don't have a parameterless constructor for math controller. So it doesn't know how to find it. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to add some references. Manage NuGet packages on our dependency injection project. And we want ninject. Okay, we'll want ninject.web.web API. And it looks like we have a couple here. So we want this one here. One thing I do is look at the downloads, like this updated one. That's new. I haven't seen that one before. So we want that one. And then we want web host. Web API.webhost. Install that. Accept. Close. Now let's build it. Go back over to Postman. Voila, it works. Okay, so you can see there's just a little bit of a difference between Web API controllers and MVC controllers. All we had to do is add those references, and then everything else is all wired up. Okay, now let's add some unit testing for our Web API controller. So we'll create a folder API. I like to follow the same folder structure as in the project that we're testing. Math controller test. And then we want test class. And we want add zeros. Now we'll just say add because we don't care what the values are. So we're going to need a mock math service. Okay, instantiate that. And then we need our controller. And we include those references there. Mock math service is what we want to send the controller constructor. And we need to add another reference to our project. Okay, so our actual result will be controller.add, and then we're going to pass in 3, 4, and we'll assert it is true. It should be 7, right? R equal. And let's run that. Let's take a look. It actually got 0. So why did it get 0? Well, if you remember in our previous mock unit tests, we didn't set this up on this test. So here, let's do the actual values. Add 3 and 4 returns 7. Now when we run it, we get green. We're good. If we change this to 8, it's not going to work because we're expecting 7. Now if we do expected here, and we just pick a random number, expected, and then expected, should succeed. All right, so now we've got our unit testing down for our Web API controller. And obviously for a real test, we're going to test all the methods, test all the paths. But if we look at our math controller, it's really simple. It's just calling the math service. That's all it does. And that's what we want to do. We want to keep it simple, keep everything nice and clean, and then it makes it much easier for us to maintain. In the next video, we're going to do something cool. We're going to add a module so that we don't have to set up the mappings all throughout our solution.